All right, that is probably an all too familiar sound to many of you. That's because that is the same music as the previous podcast, which is or was the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast. However, I'm relaunching the podcast. It's a new season, and I'm embracing that new season as this podcast is now known as the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast. So welcome to the new season and welcome to the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast. I am Mathew Portell, and I am going to continue to be the host of this podcast. Now, I want to give you a little bit of information. I have not recorded in many months, and there's many reasons why that I took a break from recording. One of them, as many of you know, that if you were a listener of the previous podcast, you know that I went back into being a full-time principal at a school here in Nashville, Tennessee. And as most of you know, especially those who are in school, it's a different time. It is a lot of work every day. And not that I didn't think that before, but starting a new school with a new team, getting to know new people, it certainly set me back a bit in that I was not prepared for going back and being able to juggle all the things. So I really am just getting back, and I'm so excited about relaunching this podcast as the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good, because here's the deal. The Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, even though I hadn't recorded in many months, I think it was 8 months or so, we have just surpassed 262,000 streams in over 100 different countries. So I appreciate people who continue to come back to listen to the podcast, or those of you who are learning about the podcast. The Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast has over 100 episodes, which means over 100 hours of free professional learning, where it's just conversations that I've had over the past few years. But this podcast is going to be the same-ish. If you've seen my social media posts, I'm going to continue to have these same conversations. I just think we're in a different time for a variety of reasons, not just school, but in the bigger picture. I think our work now as trauma-informed educators, healing-centered educators, whatever or however that you want to see it, is more imperative now than it's been in a really long time. And I want to tell you a little bit about why that is. And before I get into it, you all, I'm unapologetic for this shameless plug, because so much work. And if you all were listeners to the other podcast, you know I talked about this extensively. And to be able to hold a resource that many of us have poured our heart, souls, sweat, tears, and experiences into is unlike anything I've ever experienced, because I couldn't be more proud of this resource that is now available to everyone. It is our book, and that includes Ingrid Cochran, Dr. Taisha Noyes, Julie Kurtz, and Dr. Julie Nicholson were the author team that I had the privilege of joining and being a part of as the lead author of Reducing Stress in Schools, Restoring Connection and Community. Just today, I found out that it is number 2 on Amazon for educational, I think it's psychology. I'm actually going to literally look it up right now so I can tell you for sure what it is number 2 in. And I would be tickled if it were number 1 right now, but I don't think it moves that quickly on Amazon. But nonetheless, educational philosophy. It is number 2 today, and that is very exciting that this resource is getting out there and people are able to hear the stories. Honestly, if you've been listening to this podcast over the years, you're probably going to recognize many of the stories that I contributed in here, because I've told many of them on the podcast. And I also have to give a shout out to a great friend, a mentor, a colleague that I learned so much from, and that's Jim Sporleader. If you've seen Paper Tigers, you know Jim was the principal in Walla Walla, Washington, and was a transformational leader way early in the movement of understanding trauma. Jim wrote our foreword, and it meant the world to me as someone who has been supported, guided, and friended for so many years with Jim, from my previous school to even the current one. I know he's enjoying retirement right now, but the fact that he was willing in his retirement to write the foreword for this book is pretty incredible. So shout out to you, Jim. Appreciate you, love you, man, and really appreciate all of the support that you've given over the many years. As I've been a principal, a consultant, a keynote speaker, all of that, you've supported along these many, many years. So what I want to get into right now in this first launch of the Unapologetic Disruptor for Good podcast is I just want to kind of dig into where we are post-pandemic, and not just my opinion, but what the research and what the studies have shown about where we are. And then I want to get into, and I'm talking culturally, society-wise. What I then want to talk about is, let's talk about inside our houses. And by that, I mean inside our schools. What's happening inside our schools? I am back in a school as an executive principal. And so I feel it every day. I see it every day. And so let's talk really quickly. And I want to welcome you. If you are listening live on any of the social media platforms, please comment. Let me know what you think. You can type it in whatever platform you're on, and I'll be able to see that. I would love to hear from you and your thoughts and your experiences and what's been going on in your space, whether you're in a school, whether you support a school, whether you're a parent, whether you're a student, whether you're a therapist, whoever you are. I welcome your comments into this podcast. But let's talk about the impact of COVID, because I hear all the time, kids these days, they're not what they were. It's a different world, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it is. And we know that COVID had a major impact. There was actually some research done that the pandemic has been referred to as the most collective trauma of our lifetime. And as a society, as a world, it was one of the greatest impacts in our lifetime that we felt as a globe. And I know there's been many impacts, including war and political division. There's a lot of things that have happened, but collectively, it could have been considered one of the most impactful traumatic experiences collectively of our lifetime. The American Psychological Association actually surveyed, and they found nearly 2/3 of respondents reported that their lives had been permanently changed by the pandemic. And a large portion of the country has been living in a sustained survival mode. Now, I don't know about you all, but I feel this in school every day. I feel it from the students. I feel it from the educators and support staff. I feel it from the parents. And sometimes I feel it within myself, of just this long-term sustained survival mode feeling. We add the political parts of it, and it even is more heavy, especially now given the unknowns of what's happening. It's just this idea of this sustained stress of survival mode that has played a major impact on us as individuals and collectively. In 2022 and 2023, there was the record high number of school shootings resulted in injuries and death, and 40% of educators say that they have fears of mass homicide event taking place at their schools. So when I say the pandemic, that's not it, you all. We've got to talk about our roles as educators has changed early on, after Columbine, and after many of the other early tragedies that happened in schools. Our roles change. We are frontline responders right now. I know in my school we have to do drills often. There's bullet resistant glass on our windows. We have multiple locks, interior and exterior. And if you don't already know, Nashville was one of the most recent cities and school districts to experience an in-school shooting. We lost a 16-year-old student at one of our local high schools due to a school shooting. So we're talking about the layers, right, of all of this, and these are just in recent times. So we know that we have to be thinking differently, because if we're talking about inside of our house or our schools, right? In 2021, there was a nationally represented brand survey of over 2,300 teachers and over 1,500 principals. And they found that teachers and principals are feeling more stressed out, burned out, depressed than any other working adults. Now, I want to say that again. They found that educators, principals, teachers are more stressed out, burned out, and depressed than any other working adults. And many have already left the profession or report that they plan to leave in the next 2 years. That was actually found in 2022 by Steiner et al., who did some research in that. You all, we have to unapologetically disrupt the brokenness of what we know we're experiencing every day. And here's what I want to warn people about, because I felt it, I hear it, I see it. This is not an us versus them situation. We are not against the children. We are not against the parents, right? We are not against. Once we put that division of us versus them and our ideas and our thoughts and our processing, when it comes to students are struggling too. Parents are struggling too. When we step in a space and understand that that's the case, it makes our jobs more doable, but it also makes it more human. And I think humanizing where we are right now is really important. And are we dealing with situations and escalations and ideations that we haven't to this level? 100%. Which tells me we can't do what we've always done. We have to start thinking about doing things differently. Kids are no longer coming into our classrooms and in our schools, sitting down and saying, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and doing everything that they're asked to do on the first try. That's just not how the brain and the body works. It's how that we have to look at it differently. We've got to think about, what's the impact of this collective stress? What is the impact of the collective trauma? What does our body and brains do in the midst of that? I'm not going to get into all of the science, but it's just thoughts around this idea that we got to do it differently. We've got to move away from getting kids to comply and simply do what we ask them to do because we need them to do it. And yeah, it may be in the best interest of them, but a lot of kids, and I'll be honest, a lot of adults too. All of us. And I think sometimes if I took that same approach with adults, if they just did what I told them to do, it would be great. But that's not how it works, right? We have to connect. We have to build. We have to build capacity. We have to meet people where they are. And kids are no different. Listen to this. This was also found by that same study in 2022. That almost 3/4 of teachers and 85% of principals report frequent job-related stress compared to just 1/3 of the working adults. Further, 59% of teachers and 48% of principals say they're burned out compared to 44% of other workers in different areas. We know this. We know this. We feel it every day. There is no more suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Just get in there and do it, right? We've got to think differently about what we do. And here's the thing. I have to say that personally, I have to set a boundary for myself. And that if I'm not doing what is best for the kids and what I'm feeling and how I'm responding is potentially even psychologically unsafe for kids and adults, I have to step back. And I've done that this year, thanks to my friend, colleague, author, Dr. Lori Desautel, who shared with my school. And I made a statement and it was, we're all in for kids. And she stopped me and said, Portell, That can't be the way it is. You have to be all in for all. And she was 100% right. She called me out in front of my staff, and I needed to be called out in front of the staff because she was right. We had to shift our paradigm. I had to shift my paradigm that it was 100% about the kids and move it back to it's 100% about all of us. Because we know this is where we are, right? This is where we currently are. Here's another, and this is a different study. But recent data shows that 80% of U.S. public schools report that the pandemic negatively impacted student behavior and social emotional learning, and that students' behavioral challenges have increased and students' mental health has declined. You all, these aren't behavior problems that we're experiencing right now. These are stress problems that we're experiencing right now with our children, with our adults, with our principals, with our parents. This isn't behavior problems. This is stress, right? We know this. If you've listened to this podcast in the past, you know this. We've talked about it so many times. The impact of stress. We know the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex. We know the hippocampus. We know all about the brain. And if you don't, no worries. Just get the book right here and it goes through that, right? But it is about reducing this idea of stress in schools because it is incomprehensible of where we are. So let me tell you, I'm very excited about relaunching the podcast, and I already have a ton of guests that are lining up to come on. I met an incredible leader in the space of coaching and sports, Martin Sims, at the Attachment and Trauma Network conference just last weekend. And I basically begged him to come on to the podcast and have a conversation because his lived experience, as well as his knowledge and how he is approaching sports in a way that is so incredible for kids and helping them navigate the use of sports as a regulatory tool. And if any of you played sports, I know I probably don't look like it now, but I did in high school, which is why I'm limping around, because my high school injuries of blowing out my knee is coming back to haunt me as I'm in my late 40s. But if you've played sport, it has all the components that we need in community. It has camaraderie, it has friendship, it has collective problem solving, it has practice, it has physical movement, it has repetition. There's so many parts of the impacts of sports as a regulatory tool for human beings. It's incredible. And that goes to our elementary school. I'm super excited to know that we have a soccer team and we have a cross-country track team in my public school. And I love that it's happening in elementary schools because we know the process. We also have other guests coming on, experts, and then practitioners. I'm just wanting to speak to anyone. If you're listening to this or you've listened to this podcast, email me, mportell@tienetwork.org. I would love to have you on the podcast. This is just about us learning together. You don't have to be an expert in anything but your own thoughts and experiences. You can come on, we can have a conversation, and we can learn from each other, because that's what this journey is for, is about learning from each other. It isn't about anything other than let's get folks together, let's talk, let's chat, and let's learn, because that's what we are. We're in unprecedented times where I don't know if nobody has lived through what we are going through now with the pandemic and the increase of gun violence in our communities and in our schools, and the political division we feel right now. There's so much happening that we've got to learn from this. We've got to do better. In the words of Maya Angelou, we do what we know better, we do better. It's time that we do better. And part of that unfortunately, is being an unapologetic disruptor for good. It is doing what kids need for kids when they need it, and each other and adults and our colleagues. Because I can tell you, stress doesn't stop, trauma doesn't stop when we become adults. It's part of, unfortunately, many people's lives, and we have to navigate it. right? I always say in schools, we're not training kids for career and college ready only. We're creating them opportunities for life. I can tell you, most kids that come out in career or college ready don't know how to self-regulate, don't know what co-regulation is, don't know the impact of stress on your brain. That's what this work is about. It's about going, listen, we can continue to call behavior problems what they are, but they're stress problems, and we have to teach people, kids, adults, humans, how to manage it. Right? We don't want to. We can't eliminate stress, but we certainly can build the capacity of kids and adults and humans to know how to positively manage that stress when it's experienced, right? Because that's always going to be part of living in life. And so that's really important, which is why I wanted to relaunch this podcast. I'm actually going to go outside of education some, and I'm going to talk to some community partners. I'm going to talk to some business owners. I'm going to talk to a lot of different people, because this isn't just an education problem, although that's where my heart and soul is. This is really a human problem right now. And so I'm looking forward to having these guests come back on the podcast. I'm going to try to record several times a month on Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m., just as we are tonight. And I'm going to try to bring as much energy as we can, but you all know it is March. Time change is coming. We are springing forward here in Nashville, and that means we lose an hour's sleep. And the day stays the same at school, right? I show up at 6. I don't leave till 4:30 or 5. And in whatever happens in between there, like most of you know, if you are in that space, you never know what's going to happen. But I'm still going to commit to being here on Tuesday evenings. And I'll be honest, I think this is much about me as it is anyone else. I enjoy doing this podcast. I enjoy learning from people. I enjoy talking to other people about their experiences. And I love sharing this as a resource. Again, it's been streamed 262,000 times around the globe. So it is a tool that's happened to helping many, many people. I'm not going to stay on for a whole 45 minutes. I really just wanted time to kind of reintroduce the podcast, let you know that we are going to continue to have these conversations. I'm going to continue to invite educators, researchers, students, parents, community members, business owners. We're just going to keep adding people in. I do want to say that I really want to get practitioners on the podcast. If you are in a school, I want to talk to you. Because right now, we have got to hear from our educators. It's hard right now. I'm not going to lie. It's challenging most days. But I'll be honest, I didn't get back into being a principal because I thought it would be easy. To be quite honest, it's my form of activism right now, right? I think a lot's happening in our public schools, especially here in Tennessee. A lot's happening, and this is where I feel like I can make the biggest difference and be that unapologetic disruptor for good, and come in and have these conversations and support students and adults and make sure we're continuing the march forward on this space. So exciting to have some people. Ginger, it's great to see you. Ginger Healy has joined us live on social media. Joe Brummer, thank you for joining. I appreciate you being here. These are some of my friends. They've been on the podcast. They are authors. They are practitioners. They are doing this work in the world. So thank you all for joining us. I do want to tell you just a little bit about this book because I want to make sure you have the opportunity to get it if you so would choose. This book you can get, and right now on the screen, if you're watching live, if you're not, no worries, and you're listening to the podcast later, you can go to Harvard Education Press. It is published by Harvard, and you can type in HCPR25, and that will get you 20% off of the book. They've given that to the authors to be able to share that love. Right now, I think it's like $33, so it'd be just a little over $25, $26 for this amazing resource. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it was outlined, and if I can pull it up, I want to read one of the reviews that we just got. I'm going to tell you, it made me feel super excited to read it because it's exactly what we had hoped it would be for readers. And so let me look this up really quick. I'm going to read it very quickly. Justine G., I don't know if you listen to the podcast or how you might get this thank you, but This is what Justine just said about the book. Actionable strategies for teachers and staff to address trauma-related behavioral challenges. And it was reviewed on the 21st, which was just a few days ago. She said, I love the focus on stress reduction strategies and how accessible and engaging the illustrative stories were, including the teacher and staff in the examinations of the effects of stress, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, was illuminating and clearly an urgently needed area of attention. As a parent, not an educator, I still found the book so inspiring in its guidance. And I so appreciated the actionable strategies as we all seek stress reduction in our own children and peers and educators' lives. Would definitely recommend this engaging read. You all, that was a parent. That wasn't even an educator that gave that review when they read this book. So this book isn't just for educators, it's for anyone, because stress has impacted everyone. But I'll tell you what we did. We were very purposeful in the way we outlined this book. We made it usable, right, as a book study in your school. I was very excited to write the introduction. It is my shout out to all the educators and where we are and what we should do moving forward. So shout out to all the educators who are out there doing this work daily. But here's what we did. We added, these are real life experiences. We start every chapter with I start every chapter pretty much with just a story about my own journey around being trauma informed and the mistakes I've made, because in education, we rarely talk about those mistakes. And that's something I'm very open about. I didn't get it right. I still don't get it right all the time, right? And that's part of the journey. But I use those stories to be vulnerable in a space of saying, listen, you don't have to get it right 100% of the time. Because if you try to do that, you're never going to do anything. We just don't get it right every time. But starting is the key. I will tell you, I'm very excited about this little section inside the book, and this is what it's called. I can't see it, but if you're on live, but I'm going to read you the heading, and it is A Need for a Paradigm Shift, Unapologetically Disrupting Educational Systems. Very proud of that one. And when I say disrupt educational systems, I want to be very clear. What I say is, we have structures that are effective. We have research that shows us what we know to do moving forward. But I also think we have to begin to adjust our paradigm based off of the newest research, the newest science, because Skinner was great back in the day, right? We know Skinner was the foundation, but we now know there's so much more research, so much more neurology and neuroscience out there that was not there when we had theories way back in when we were in teacher school. This is relatively new work. And so that's what I mean when I say unapologetically disrupting systems, amongst many other things. But I want to share one more thing with you. We looked at this book through a socio-ecological model, which means we looked at historical context, we looked at systems, we looked at community, and we looked at individual students, because those interconnected models are really important, both historically for collective trauma, but historically in systems. We've got to be able to see that, step back, and understand where we're coming from to understand where we're going. If we don't want to look to see what's happened in the past to inform us about how to move in the future, then we're missing the mark, right? That was really important. The other piece is at the end of every chapter, there is a case study. And the case studies are real lived experiences from all of us, all of the authors, around conversation pieces around this resource. This isn't just read it, keep moving. This is read it, connect with people, have a conversation. And we might even do a book study here on the Trauma Informed Educators Network, and even through the podcast here soon. Who knows? Who knows? I get wild hairs all the time and jump in and do things. But I wanted to make you aware of that. And it's laid out very purposefully. And we focused on practices. What can you do? we did build it from the science because we can't start without that, but we built it from science and our experiences. A lot of these practices we've done. And so it's not just pulled out of thin air. These are research and lived experience based, and so it gives you tools to be able to move through the incomprehensible experiences that we have on a daily basis as humans, not even just as educators. So I wanted to make sure that you have that. Again, if you want to order this book, there's a 20% off code right there. It's HCPR25. You can order that directly from Harvard Education Press. If you've ordered it from Harvard, you can still go and leave a review on Amazon. Please do. And always, please leave reviews on the podcast. I don't know if you all know, but the reviews help get the podcast to move up some of the charts. We've been as high as 10 in New Zealand for all-time podcasts. We've hit the charts in, I think, 7 different countries. Not so much in the US, although that's where the most of the listenership is. But I know we were on the charts in Ireland and Singapore and Australia and New Zealand. So shout out to all of you that listen to the podcast across the world, because I know listening to me babble sometimes may not be the most entertaining, but here you are showing up and still showing up to listen to the podcast. So be on the lookout. Follow the podcast, Unapologetic Disruptor for Good, on your platform of choice. Follow the Trauma Informed Educators Network. Our page now is 83,000 followers, so there's a lot of people who follow the network. We share a lot of thoughts. We share a lot of quotes. We share a lot of our work, and we're going to share a lot of ideas on how we can move forward. So please follow the Trauma Informed Educators Network. And then if you're not a part of the Trauma Informed Educators group, network group, please join the group. It's free, doesn't cost anything. All you got to do is go answer 4 questions. You get access to 34,000 like-minded people from across the globe. And that gives us an opportunity to connect. People are sharing resources. People are talking about their scenarios and asking for support. So there is plenty of resources out there for us and created by the Trauma Informed Educators Network. And then lastly, you all, we are developing a pretty remarkable team. And I have to say, I left the Attachment and Trauma Network Conference in Atlanta last weekend. And before I left, we sat in a circle of about 5 amazing practitioners, facilitators, and presenters. And we just started mapping out this collective support that we are going to begin to provide for schools and districts across the globe. And we're talking people who are brilliant through not just their knowledge, but their lived experience. And so be prepared, because we're going to be launching very soon, in the next several months, I hope. I know the team is going to do a retreat in the summer, so it might be in the summer. We're going to be launching some roadmaps of support on, if you're a school, what do you do? If you're a district, what do you do? How do you pull in trauma-informed with also restorative practices, with well-being and self-care and collective care? As a team, we're coming together and we are developing these supports for schools and districts. So be on the lookout for that, because I think that's going to be a really important tool. And we've got some pretty remarkable people involved, brilliant people involved, who are ready to jump into your spaces with you and muddle through this mess of trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I can tell you, I've done this work with many schools and districts, and one that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to shout you out, Chester County Intermediate Unit in Chester County, Pennsylvania. My friends there, we worked for a couple years together, and even last week when I was going to the ATN, I was getting texts from some of the principals and therapists and educators just asking, and they were missing going to the conference. They weren't able to attend, but this work, you all, is not a facilitator coming in, teaching you some things and leaving. This work is relational. And I can tell you, I've built so many incredible relationships with people through this work of supporting schools and districts, and I know all the other facilitators have too. Matter of fact, I did a training, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I just got an email saying, hey, can you come back and do a virtual training on a Saturday morning for us? And of course, I'm going to do that because it's about these relationships and moving this work forward. Even if it's one facilitated professional learning at a time, that's going to be important. And again, before I close the podcast, I want to tell you, if you're interested on being on this podcast, and I get people emailing me all the time from marketing firms and agents trying to get their clients on the podcast. I'll be honest, I don't respond a lot. There's some that catch my eye and I'm like, yeah, let's do this. It seems pretty cool. But what I want is you. I want the practitioners. I want the listeners. I want the facilitators. I want the parents, the kids. I want to get everybody on here and have a conversation around the work we do. So I just want to encourage you, email me, mportell@tienetwork.org, and I will say, you will get an auto response that says, please be patient, that I am back in a school. And I mean that, please be patient, because I do not get to that every day. I try, but certainly want to hear from you. And that's what the listeners want. They want a conversation from people who are willing to share, be vulnerable, and step in a space of learning. So Chris Jenkins, it was great to meet you too. Met many years ago at this point, and really appreciate you being a part of this work and listening in live today. So you all, in the next, I am going to be honest, I'll have to look at the calendar. I can't remember when the next podcast is. It may be actually next Tuesday. The following Tuesday, we're on spring break, and I don't know if you all take your time for spring break, but I'll be taking mine. Be taking a few days off and heading with a friend to my cabin in rural Tennessee and doing some fishing and being outside and enjoying what I hope to be nice weather. Although here in Tennessee today, you all, it was 72 and sunny. It was beautiful. And I had to look at it through my window because I didn't get a chance to go out until after school. So wherever you are, I hope that that you're enjoying whatever season you're in. And metaphorically, I hope we can all get through this season together of just navigating all that it is. And there's so much happening right now. But as always, I thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you subscribed to the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, don't worry. I just switched the name. You're still going to get those notifications. But as always, I am going to ask, please, please, please go give us a review on whatever platform you use, because that helps us. Just give us a few sentences. It doesn't take a lot. And then again, if you want to buy the book, Reducing Stress in Schools, Restoring Connection and Community, by myself and a team of remarkable authors, use HCPR25 to get your 20% discount from Harvard Education Press, and then go to Amazon and leave that review for us, because again, it's not about us. You all, if you've written a book, you know you don't make money off of a book, but what we do is have an impact, and that's the important part of this book and resource. So all right, well, I just took 40 minutes just to kind of reconnect and let you all know I'm back. I'm excited. And this is just the new season of Unapologetic Disruptor for Good. So here's what I want to say. Go be disruptive and yet still continue to be awesome. All right, for those of you who are still on, thank you so much. I see several people on. Just appreciate you all being on here live. I will post up the next podcast with some other folks. I will let you all know if you're still on here, and I see there's several people on here. I am going to be having a co-host who is my co-author, and she's going to be popping in sometimes. Her name is Dr. Taisha Noyes. If you've met her, you know why. She is a beast. She is incredibly brilliant, and we love to talk to each other. So we figured I will include her on this podcast, and you all get to hear from her because she is amazing. So thank you all so much. Thank you for spending a Tuesday evening with me for a little bit, and I will see you all soon. Have a great night.